with us as we move into the future, creating a parallel infrastructure or system for us to rely on, safeguard.
Their model is for a dystopian technocratic society. By no means am I going to live in that world, or my children and future generations.
Project Override.
The beginning.
All right, session 2.
Project Override.
Yeah.
So today, this session here, we're just going to go over the overview of what Project Override is. And we're just going to get to the roots of it. Override the reset. This slogan is a marketing strategy. In no way, shape, or form is there going to be a final product called Project Override. This is simply to get out the message that we are in direct competition with the World Economic Forum's agenda, referred to as the Great Reset. So it started as Override the Reset, and as I started discussing things with Tad, it then became
Overriding the resets. And I sort of that just kind of came out of my mouth because I realized that when you look through history, there is very clear evidence that this has been a long-standing agenda, and there's probably been many resets, and they probably plan to do many more. So I thought, utilizing this project kind of in the now space to be a transitory thing that can move with us as we move into the future, creating a parallel sort of infrastructure or system for us to rely on, like a safeguard almost.
Right, safeguard, a safety net.
Yeah.
It can either be restructuring the whole government, fixing it from the inside, so to say, gutting it, fixing it from the inside, or, as we stated, parallel running. And this is where we're not overthrowing the government in any way, shape, or form.
Nope.
I use the term in my past videos, overriding the government. And the definition of override is set aside. So we have this corrupt system that's going to continue to run. People are going to stay on that ship if they choose to stay on that ship. But we're building a parallel system that mirrors the functions of the current government infrastructure and can provide the organization society needs to survive into the future.
Yeah, it's a transitionary project in that sense. At least to my mind, it's sort of like I was saying in the initial video, what's that first step that you have to take? Well, to me, this seems like a very good first step, right? It doesn't mean it's forever. It means let's start here.
Yeah, there needs to be something to transition into.
Yeah.
The designs that come of Project Override don't need to be the final system, but at least what we're making here is a transitionatory system. And we're really aware that the progression of the World Economic Forum, their model is for a dystopian technocratic society. And by no means am I going to live in that world, or my children and future generations. So it is something that is very important that we build to protect our children and to secure freedom. Because when we look at the WEF, to me, it looks like they're securing enslavement of humanity. And not on board with that.
No, and they're kind of doing that through that digital ID concept,
Right.
which would be a, kind of what we're talking about, which we'll get to here in a bit. But it's the idea that they own control of that identity, not you, and they're in charge of what you can or can't do, which leads to a very bleak sort of outcome where we, as individuals, don't have a say in what comes from that. And so I think that what you've secured with the technologies you've mentioned to me before this was what got me really excited. So why don't you tell us a bit about them?
Right. So we have 2 blockchain projects that I've found that reflected the ethical considerations to build something that would last into the future. So the first one is referred to as the Verus project. And Verus means truth. And the second one is referred to as Cordal with a Q, not a P. So Cordal, like portal, but with a Q, Cordal. And so these 2 projects are community-based blockchains. There is no big investors, big money behind the scenes that have ulterior motives. They were both fairly launched. When I looked at Verus, when I found that in 2018, I participated in the launch. I saw their vision paper and I said, wow, look at this. It matches everything that I need to build what I had visioned in 2010, voting specifically. And then as I looked further into the project, they had public blockchains as a service. So these are public ledgers, decentralized distributed ledgers. And a lot of things that happen within government, you're filing paperwork, you're administrating paperwork, and that needs to be recorded on a ledger that they received it, it was sent out. And so you can do a lot with tokens. Not that these tokens have value, but they're an administrative tool and utility that can be functioned through the use of blockchains.
Just for those of us kind of new to this game, when you use the word ledger, could I think of that as like a digital history?
Digital history, yes.
Yeah.
That
Or
would be good.
would that be a good? Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. Right on.
And so what we're doing here with the Verus project, they have these things called Verus IDs, which are self-sovereign identities. We can look at these at like an account. That would be equivalent to a ballot box for voting or a pooled tax account. And so I've said that I've secured these technologies. And what I mean by securing them is that I've found these Cordal namespaces and Verus IDs, and I've purchased them to reflect the common knowledge of our locations. So in Canada here, we have the country, corporate Canada, and we have the provinces. In the United States, we have America, and we have all the 50 states. So what I did was I secured these location names that can operate as potential structures moving into the future.
Yeah, to make that transition easy, because you don't want to throw too much into the pool at one go, right? You basically have created a way for us to mirror our current system, but in a way that is decentralized, controlled by the people, and secure and safe that way.
Right, yeah. So if we're creating technology and we don't want to take out the current government, well, we could at least maybe encourage those at the government level to adopt this technology.
Yes.
If we have created something by its own merits, functions more effectively, 1,000 times faster, gets rid of bureaucracy, then why wouldn't they adopt it? Unless, of course, the corruption benefits them.
Yes.
And so the hardest thing I've kind of identified would be not convincing those who don't know about blockchain, but at least conveying these concepts to people that work within government. They are subconsciously incentivized to stay with the current government mandate and the progression of what the government has planned. They're financially tied, subconsciously their survival's tied to that incentivization. Therefore, they're less likely to adopt what we're pitching here.
Well, they're under contract. They're paid for to provide services, and those contracts are what hold them to it. And so I think a big part of what you talked about, what drew me to some of the concept here, is being able to have control of our contracts. So we get to choose who we contract with, is sort of what you were saying.
Right. So these self-sovereign identities act as almost a digital container for your contracts. And so the current government you're in contract with may have a birth certificate that's your main contract you entered into when you entered into that system, or those birth certificates are no longer valid and now they've transitioned to vaccination passports, which deal with either your medical contract or your medical insurance agreement. And those things are now binding you into this public health and safety dystopian world they're creating. So the digital container is an area where we can respect the right to self-determination, and you have the opportunity to cross over to a new jurisdiction or venue where you can put in a digital contract into this digital container, which may be the claim of your life or maybe your proof of identity that differs from your current government. While maintaining your connection to the current operating system with your passports, we can transition over and interoperate with the current system.
Yeah. No, that's great. One of the sort of things that kind of came to my mind that helped me understand what we're kind of discussing here was the idea that if we had a localized government, and say we did decide that we still want to use the tax system of some sort, so we want to contribute to the local infrastructure of our roads or something. If I'm a business, there can be accounts that our local representative is in charge of. I see that money go into that account, they're then in charge of distributing that to the contractor or the companies that build the roads, or you want to build a playground or whatever we decide we want to create as a community, and we get to see how that money is brought into the system and how it's spent, where currently we pay up to 60% of our income towards something where we have very little concept of where that money actually goes.
Right.
Which brings me into one of the final pieces, which was the quorum voting protocol, which is how we would decide how this, say, for example, these taxes would get spent. Can you speak
Right,
on that
yeah.
a bit?
The quorum voting protocol is an attempt at creating a protocol for direct democracy. Though we may still have representatives in our democracy, we could assign these politicians, representatives, their own sort of digital ID or self-sovereign ID that has the functions that the citizens, through this quorum voting protocol, can revoke their permissioned ID. The politicians' representatives themselves may have permissioned access to these tax accounts. And by no means does this new system have to have tax. We're exploring different models here. And so if we do have representatives, they would have a permissioned ID that the citizens themselves, if those elected officials don't fulfill their promises, we can revoke their ID. And we don't have to wait this 4 years or whatever the cycle is in another country.
Well, and it's also, there's so much financial incentive behind those candidates. We really have no idea who these people are often.
Right.
You know, I think it's the illusion that on the local level we might know some of the people down here, but when it comes to those bigger structures, we're not actually living in what I see as a democracy, because that choice is not there, where this quorum system truly provides that choice.
Right, yeah, and when we link it back to the tax accounts, imagine actually seeing where your tax dollars are spent, or
Yeah.
wow, my tax dollars aren't going to a centralized federal authority, they're
Yeah.
staying within my locality, and we can see where they're being spent.
Mm-hmm.
So that concept in itself, I feel, is very potent, where we can, see and we can decide whether we could almost customize the percentage of where our taxes go every month if we wish. These designs are all open to scrutiny and to different options. So the quorum voting protocol simply operates on 45-day time periods, 2 21-day periods where you're voting on an issue, and you have a second 21-day voting period to change your mind. The 21 days allows for discussions, and it mirrors the current contractual timelines in the existing government. And then at day 42 to 45, we have the ability to rescind as a safeguard switch this final vote. And the final vote is logged on the blockchain, the immutable ledger, as a store of perception.
Yeah, totally. Well, we're kind of nearing the end of this second session here. We got a lot more to come. We're going to cover some philosophy, how that transparency works, the pros and cons. The next session is definitely going to start to touch on some of the law, and we're gonna just keep going from there. But I think really, in kind of summary, you said it earlier. It's what we're talking about with Project Override is the right to self-determination. So
Right. The right to self-determination
Yeah.
is the most important aspect here. We all have the right to contract with who we wish,
yes,
and that includes your government. We have the right to choose the government servicing agency we wish to contract with.
and that includes the right to the types of healthcare you'd like to partake in, the types of education for your children, the types of green local initiatives, how you take care of your environment. Basically the possibilities are endless. And so yeah, we'll see you again in part 2 or 3. Sorry, part 3.
See you part 3.
Project Override